We are rolling. Good morning.
Good morning.
I made it.
You did. Traffic and all.
You guys made it too.
Yes, there you are. We're all here. Let's get started.
Okay. We're on session 84.
84.
No.
Not yet.
Close, though.
Not quite. 63. We have talked for the last 2 or 3 sessions about the dweller on the threshold. And there was one thing I failed to mention last time. We talked about how the encounter that HPB had with the dweller and Stanton Moses's encounter were extremely difficult, to the point where HPB was afraid she would die. And Stanton Moses's experience was so excruciating that she begged Moria to stop the process, and he said he must be tested. This isn't the case for everyone, and I'll tell you why. You are in control to a point. As we pointed out, the dweller is you. It's all of your darkest nature, every hateful thing or every aspect of your personality that is the lowest in nature, as opposed to your higher self, which is purity itself. And that's the key, purity. If you have been working using Raja Yoga and the techniques that we describe in our series, if you've been practicing that, getting your ego under control, practicing unconditional love for all of humanity and for our planet, the plants and animals, every aspect about our planetary system, if you have been working on that, your encounter with the dweller on the threshold, which can take place over a long period of time, will be very manageable. And when it comes time to being tested for passing an initiation, it won't be that difficult, but only if you put in the work ahead of time. So, word of warning, don't just listen to what we say. We hope that you will also put it into practice. Alcott was very much beloved by the Mahatmas. And yet, he had some defects. We've been talking about some of our spiritual heroes that we look up to, and he is definitely one of them. He is 100% devoted to the mission of spiritual development, to the point that he gave up a very lucrative law career in order to move the Theosophical Society from New York City to Bombay. And it took all of his savings. Within 18 months, he had depleted all of the savings that he had saved up. And then they had to figure out how to make a living on their own. And of course, the Mahatmas helped them. How did they do that? By suggesting that they create a magazine, The Theosophist, and it was only the income from The Theosophist that allowed them to pay minimum living expenses and to donate the rest of it to the operating expenses of the society. So he was very devoted. He would, as K.H. said, he would travel anywhere. He would fraternize with any people. He would eat any food that they offered. He would sleep on the floor if necessary. He would travel by elephant or by cart, which would practically break your bones.
These are all really great virtues. I don't want to hear what his defects are.
But he had one big defect, and K.H. kind of hinted at it when he was saying that he wanted Sinnett to be the one to present a proposal about branches that would be published in the Theosophist magazine. He said, because if I asked the founders, HPB would be sure to break the Padre's head with her ranting about it. And Alcott wouldn't fail to turn it as a promotion for the good deeds of the founders. In other words, ooh, look at us. So let's see what his defect was.
Before you read that, Terry, all of the travel and expenses, none of that was funded by HPB's family at all. She didn't have any assistance from her wealthy family.
Only in the very beginning. Her father, who died in 1875, I believe. No, it may have been 1874. I'm not real sure. When he died, she inherited more than $200,000, but it was all given to her in a lump sum. She bought property, remember, and lost some money on that. And she wasn't good with money. Alcott was, but he complained very often about her inability to manage money.
Okay, but none of the travel and the living expenses, none of that was funded by her.
No.
Okay, I mean, after that.
After her father died, I don't see any indication there was any money coming from her family.
They had to support themselves and partially fund the TS by just
Right.
the magazine.
Right.
Wow. And it was mainly probably through advertisers in the magazine. It wasn't
Right.
because people aren't buying. I mean, some people buy the magazine, but mostly advertisers.
Right. Mostly advertising, which was even then the only way that magazines could stay afloat.
I didn't realize that.
All right. This is, again, from the book that we've quoted a few times, Letters from the Masters of the Wisdom, second series. And C. Jinnarajadasa was introducing several letters that Alcott received from the Mahatmas, mostly from Maurya, his own master, but also from KH. But he's giving us a warning about some of these messages. So I'm going to have Paul read that.
Okay. Colonel Alcott thought of the Society as an organization for developing brotherhood and religious tolerance. HPB thought of it not in that light alone, but also as a recruiting camp for chelas who, after occult training, would carry on the work from generation to generation. The TS was to her, first and last, an agent and instrument for all possible plans of the masters. Colonel Alcott, however, saw no particular use in bringing occult ideas to the front, and especially the idea of discipleship, for he scented danger to the society in the private relations which HPB might have with members as teacher to pupil.
He was a little more in line with the Asian chelas, who were very much against this project of divulging sacred information to the general public. So he, who spent a lot of time with Asians building up the Buddhist religion and the Buddhist philosophy, was a little more like they were.
On the other hand, HPB clearly saw that without a definite nucleus of chelas pledged to carry out the orders of the masters, the society would become merely one more philanthropic organization.
So what happens is that many of these letters that are in here, and I urge everyone to read this book, are complaints from the Mahatmas to Alcott about how he treated HPB. He was like the two Englishmen, sometimes quite rude to her. And they chastised him several times about it, beginning even when they were still in New York. And it's kind of strange to me that despite the fact that he had seen her during this whole transformation period that took place early in 1875 and spending often 24 hours a day with her when they were traveling around India and doing the work of setting up the society, that he wasn't more aware of the difficulties that she had to deal with mentally, spiritually, and physically, and that he didn't make allowances for that. He was a little more like the Englishman in saying, why can't you act more normal? Why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? And she was doing the best she could, but she had some real challenges to deal with. So that was his big defect, was that he never fully recognized what she was and why her role was so important in building up the Theosophical Society. He was all about the organization. She was all about using it as a recruiting method to bring European chelas into the fold. Because up until then, almost every single one, with a few exceptions, of their chelas were Asian. And that's still the way it is today, I'm afraid.
Safe to say, Terry, that Alcott's relationship with the masters was very different than HPB's.
Yes.
Was he psychically in contact with them?
As long as she was alive, they were able to communicate somewhat with him. He was more apt to receive communications. I don't know if he ever spent much time meditating, but early in the morning, when you're in that state before you completely wake up, where you're receptive, that seems to be the time of day that sometimes they could communicate with him. Also, using HPB's energy, they could make letters form. He, at one time, was traveling to London, where she was, and he received a message on the ship that dropped out of the air. And it was, again, warning him, be careful, because you have some really negative ideas. And they were afraid he was going to use those to beat her over the head when he got to London. So they warned him about it.
He and HPB truly did have a great bond, though. I mean, they were very close, and they had very similar intentions at first, at least.
At first, that's the clue. They were completely on the same page in the beginning, to the point that Alcott gave up his career and his family and everything.
Cared passionately about the TS.
Yes. But after the SPR incident, which occurs in 1884 and 1885, he was quite upset, and many of the Asian chelas were upset with her. We'll discuss that at the proper place. And he kind of held that resentment to the end of his life. We're going to get a lot of insight on all of the actors in this. We're putting together all of the pieces in laying the groundwork so that at the end of our series, we will follow what happens to each of our major actors in this drama that we're encountering here, and we'll see where they ended up in life. Two more things I want to talk about. The parable of the talents. You know about that, right?
No.
Oh, okay. You missed that day in Sunday school.
Probably. Played hooky or ditch.
You missed that day. The parable of the talents. I've been bringing in some of the teachings of Jesus because they are absolutely precious. They are very useful. And anyone who is interested in esoteric Christianity should know these backwards and forwards. This, again, is one of the parables that he was giving to his followers when he was describing what it was like to be part of this kingdom of heaven that he talked about. And as we've said before, when he says the kingdom of heaven, he's talking about the spiritual hierarchy that we all can be part of. We aren't yet. We are completely spiritual in nature, but we have to change over from being fixated and living in this outer world and instead live in the higher world where our higher self resides. That is where the kingdom of God is. So he's giving clues as to how you make that happen. And one of the parables was the parable of the talents. Now, what is a talent? You have no idea.
A skill?
A skill. It's not something that God just gives you, although in this instance is sort of that. A talent in biblical times was a sum of money. And it was a big sum of money. It usually was in the form of silver, but it was the amount of money that a worker would have been paid in a 20-year period, 20 years of work. So you can try to calculate it as the value of silver, but that is useless because the means of mining silver have changed drastically. The price wouldn't reflect that anymore. But the better part is to try to figure out what it would be worth today in 20 years' salary for a person. So let's just, for our own purposes, estimate that a worker who had, and we're talking about labor, we're not talking about someone selling in a bazaar somewhere. We're talking about a laborer who really is working. Let's say that that person could make $25 an hour. How much would they make in 20 years? In 1 year, he would make approximately $50,000. If he worked 40 hours a week and worked 50 weeks, he would make $50,000.
40 hours a week and 50 weeks a year?
Yeah. So $50,000 a year for 20 years equals $1 million. See, anybody can be a millionaire. You just have to work 20 years and save every penny.
And not spend anything.
Anybody can be a millionaire. Yeah, $1 million in 20 years. So here's the story that Jesus told. A wealthy man who had many employees was leaving on a long trip, and he needed to keep his money safe. So he called 3 of his most trusted employees, and to one of them, he gave 1 talent, $1 million. To the second one, he gave 2 talents, $2 million. And to the third one, he gave $5 million, $8 million among them. That would be a lot of money. That's still a very large sum of money. And he gave them charge to keep this safe. So after a long period of time, he comes back and asks for an accounting from each one of them. The one that had 5 talents, $5 million, said, "Master, I took the money you gave me and I bought merchandise and traded with it, and I doubled the money. Here's 10 talents back, $10 million back." And he said, "You are good and faithful, and I will put you in charge of much of my estate." The one that got $2 million said the same thing. "Master, I invested in products and I sold it and I turned the money over, and now I have $4 million to give you." And he said the same thing. "You have been faithful in little. I will make you a supervisor of much." And then the third one, who only got $1 million, started whining right from the beginning. "Master, I knew that you were very harsh and a difficult man, and that you make money off of the work of other people, and that you reap where you didn't sow. And so I was afraid. So I buried the money, but here it is. Here's your money back." And he said, "You weak and slothful servant. The very least you could have done was to invest it with a money broker and at least made some interest on it. And then you would have more. As it is, it's actually worth less, because I'm sure in those times there was still inflation. So now the money is worth less than it was because it wasn't put to any use." So he said, "I'm banishing you from the kingdom and sending you to outer darkness, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth." I'm not sure if Jesus actually said that or one of his chroniclers added that to it, but it's kind of funny. The point is that he was referring to the kingdom of God. And obviously, this refers to chelas because we know they are tested and tested. And one of the tests is to see what they will do with money and to see what they will do with small favors that are given to them. They might have a very small city. Let's see what they will do with this.
Also, the IP, the intellectual property that's bestowed upon them. What are they going to do with the wisdom that's being taught to them? That's the same thing, too.
Any talent or anything of value that is entrusted with them, what are they going to do with it? Mm-hmm. And it is that exactly the teaching. Do they just keep it? Do they say, oh, this is really cool? Or do they share it? Do they go out and spread the word? So it's a moral story about how do you handle things that are in your stewardship? Because the Mahatmas are stewards, and they don't look at their role as anything but that. Remember, a couple of sessions ago, we learned that they are the protectors, the stewards of the teachings. And they are very jealously guarded, and they have to be responsible. They get in trouble if they share them with the wrong people. So when Hume was trying to beat them over the head to get these secrets out of them, there was no way they were going to share them with him because he was completely against the idea of being tested, and he failed every test that they did give him. That is the story of the parable of the talents. I hope more people will go back and read the New Testament in a new light and with new understanding and actually get some good out of it because it has some really good lessons in it. All right, one last thing and then we'll get to work. If you're interested in all of our discussion about the rounds and races, there's one book that I haven't yet introduced that is absolutely essential. It's called The Divine Plan by Jeffrey Barborka. And it is by far the best book if you're trying to understand everything that is included in the secret doctrine. If rounds and races are muddled in your head and make no sense, be sure you get a copy of this book. We were on question 8 last time. We did finish it. We're covering a long list of 29 questions that Sinnett had written down and sent to KA to answer at his leisure. And now we're reading the answers to these questions. The first of them were about the rounds and races, about Lemuria and Atlantis, previous root races. And then we started on a series of questions he had about science. What we covered last time was a couple of different things. First, we learned that rain can be produced by a Mahatma or a yogi, but only in a small area. And we learned also that it requires a tremendous amount of energy. The sorcerer who produced it in the presence of HPB and Alcott was so exhausted afterwards that he had to stop by Alcott's house to ask for a glass of water and to sit down and rest after doing battle with the elements. I wonder how many people have made that connection. When we talk about the elements, meaning wind, storms, rain, sun, all of those things that are part of the weather, we call it the elements. And guess who's in charge of the elements?
The elementals.
The elementals. So when you talk about that the elementals are infusing everything in nature, including all the minerals, all of the processes, they're involved in absolutely everything. They are the transmitters of energy. So elements, elementals, 100% combined.
And when you say doing battle with them, he was forcing them to produce a storm.
Right, because apparently they are somewhat recalcitrant at times, and you can actually become friends with them. HPB had several elementals. Remember the one that wanted a job to do, and so Alcott said, have it hem these towels. You're such a bad seamstress. Let the elemental, and the elemental actually had a name. Its name was Puti. And he said, ask Puti to do it. And the elemental did it, but did an atrocious job of it. Probably not as good as HPB could have done, but it was done.
To our viewers, there are certain schools of Tantra yoga, they could be considered left hand, maybe not all of them, that talk about seducing the forces of nature, which refers to the elementals. And there are teachings on it. I'm not sure if we recommend any of that. A lot of it is for magic and sorcery, but some of the teachings are available in the school of Tantra, being able to manipulate nature.
They're often called nature spirits, and all of the primitive religions are completely aware of them. We've talked about little spirit houses in Asia where they could be on every street corner. We talked last time a little bit about the meteors and the magnetic iron that falls to Earth, and how all of the temple knives in the Buddhist monasteries are made from this magnetic iron that came from space. Let's continue that list of questions with question number 9, and this is still scientific in nature. I'm reading Sennett's questions, and then Paul is reading KH's answers. Question number 9. Is the sun's corona an atmosphere of any known gases? And why does it assume the rayed shape that's always observed in eclipses?
Whether you call it a chromosphere or atmosphere, neither is correct. For it is simply the magnetic and ever-present aura of the sun, seen by astronomers only for a few brief moments during the eclipse, and by some of our chelas whenever they like, while in a certain induced state, of course. A man's head in a strong ecstatic condition when all the electricity of his system is centered around the brain will represent, especially in darkness, a perfect simile of the sun during such periods.
Yes.
In an ecstatic state. Wow. The first artist who drew the halos around the heads of his gods and saints was not inspired, but represented it on the authority of temple pictures and traditions of the sanctuary and the chambers of initiation where such phenomena took place.
And while they were still in New York, HPB produced phenomenally a kind of drawing of M.A. Oxen, which is a pseudonym for Stainton Moses. He used different pseudonyms. His real name apparently was Stainton Moseyn, Moseyn, and yet he went by M.A. Oxen sometimes, and he went by Stainton Moses. He was a peculiar fellow, and yet the Mahatmas were very interested because he had such tremendous potential. I'll put a photo of that image on the screen just so you can see what we're talking about here.
The closer to the head or to the aura-emitting body, the stronger and the more radiant the emanation, due to hydrogen, since science tells us in the case of the flames. Hence, the irregular red flames around the sun or the inner corona. During periods of magnetic inertia, the spots remain invisible. The further the emanation shoots out, the more it loses its intensity, until it gradually fades out, hence the outer corona, its rayed shape being due entirely to the latter phenomenon, whose radiance comes from the magnetic nature of the matter and the electric energy, and not at all from the intensely hot particles as asserted by some astronomers.
Science was making lots of mistakes at the time, but as they found new information, they would correct them, which is the only way you can do it.
All this is terribly unscientific, but nevertheless a fact, to which I may add another by reminding you that the sun we see is not at all the central planet of our little universe, but only its veil or its reflection.
And science, of course, would completely refute that. We don't know exactly what he's talking about, but I'm assuming that that's among the mysteries that are only discussed among their higher chelas.
Could be similar to the fact that our body is just a sheath covering up our soul.
True, exactly.
Science has tremendous odds against studying that planet, but luckily for us, we do not. Foremost of all, the constant tremors of our atmosphere, which prevent scientists from judging correctly the little they do see.
And of course, at the time, they had no way of sending telescopes into space and retrieving information from them. The atmosphere messes tremendously with being able to see the stars and other objects in space without distortion.
This impediment was never in the way of the ancient Chaldean and Egyptian astronomers, nor is it an obstacle to us, for we have means of halting or counteracting such tremors, acquainted as we are with all the Akashic conditions. Now, he's saying that the atmosphere didn't harm the Chaldean and Egyptian astronomers,
right?
Like because they were using psychic means or something?
Right,
or?
Exactly. They have instruments that see above the atmosphere. Their instruments are very different from the physical instruments of the scientists.
No more than the rain secret would this secret, supposing we divulge it, be of any practical use to your men of science unless they become occultists and sacrifice long years to the acquiring of powers. Just imagine a Huxley or a Tyndall studying Yoga Vidya.
Yeah, I want to see some of these scientists become a yogi and learn some of these siddhis.
Hence the many mistakes into which they fall and the conflicting hypotheses of your best authorities. There are forces coexistent with gravity of which they know nothing. I guess he should say yet. Know nothing yet.
Right. And then he makes an interesting statement.
Plus, there is no gravity, properly speaking, only attraction and repulsion.
Now, science, again, would refute that. Of course, there's gravity. But it's more in their way of using the word.
Well, it's semantics. I mean, gravity is attraction.
Exactly. So you have two bodies in space, and they either attract or they repel. So that's what KH is saying.
The corona contains iron as well as other vapors. To tell you of what it does consist is useless, since I am unable to translate the words we use for it. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And no such matter exists, at least not in our planetary system, except in the sun.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, so scientists are at a disadvantage. They so far can't send their instruments to the sun, so they have to simply observe it from a great distance.
The fact is, what you call the sun is simply the reflection of the huge storehouse of our system, wherein all its forces are generated and preserved. The sun being the heart and brain of our mini-universe, we might compare its faculae, those millions of small, intensely brilliant bodies of which the sun's surface, away from the spots, is made up, with the blood corpuscles of that luminary, though some of them, as correctly conjectured by science, are as large as Europe.
So, as above, so below. Whatever the physical human body is made up of, there is a correlation on many different levels, higher and higher and higher, and lower than us. So, yeah, the corpuscles being that part that transmits energy all throughout the body.
Well, it would stand to reason, though, that if a planetary spirit is maybe the head of our planet and might actually be planet Earth in physical form, why wouldn't the sun have the same constitutional makeup? The physical orb of fire and gas is the physical representation, and There's a constitution of the sun, too, a pranic layer, an astral layer, probably.
Yes, of course.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and he points out several times there are 7 layers to the sun's existence, and science knows only one.
Just like human bodies, just like our solar system. Those, quote, blood corpuscles are the electric and magnetic matter in its 6th and 7th state. So electricity has the different levels of existence.
Of course,
too.
yes, it does.
What are those long white filaments twisted like so many ropes of which the penumbra of the sun is made up? And the central part that is seen like a huge flame ending in fiery spires, and the transparent clouds, or rather vapors, formed of delicate threads of silvery light that hangs over those flames. Nothing but the electromagnetical aura, this is such a funny word, the phlogiston of the sun.
And he's used that term before. Science doesn't use it. They actually investigated it, but they were talking only about combustion, physical combustion. And the Mahatmas use it in a very different way, obviously, because they see all of the different levels. So they do use the term, but not in the same way that physical science would describe it.
Tell science that even in those days of the decline of the Roman Empire, when the tattooed Britisher used to offer the Emperor Claudius his amulet in the electronic form of a string of amber beads, at which time there were still men remaining aloof from the immoral masses who knew more of electricity and magnetism than they, the men of science, do now, and science will laugh at you as bitterly as she does over your kind dedication to me.
Yeah, what is he talking about? These tattooed Britishers offering to the Emperor Claudius an amulet, which is
in the electronic form of a string of amber beads.
Ooh, now what could this possibly be? The only thing I can imagine would be a druid.
They're from the Northern Europe area.
Yes, guess how far the Roman Empire extended?
Might have gone up there.
Up to Hadrian's Wall. So up into most of Britain. So let's see, who is the Emperor Claudius? His full name is Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. And besides being a Caesar, he was emperor. And he was emperor from 41 AD to 54 AD. So 13 years. And he is the one who finally conquered Britain. For many years, they had tried and failed. So he was the one who finally conquered Britain. And if he actually traveled there, KH is imagining one of the druids presenting him with some kind of amulet that had special powers. Claudius did everything possible to denounce the druids. He claimed that they performed human sacrifice, which seems not to be true. It was basically a propaganda stunt to reduce their popularity in Britain so that the Romans could elevate themselves. And in the end, they did force the Druids to go underground and eventually disappear. But KH is pointing out, if in fact he's talking about Druids, that they were much more highly elevated than the people outside of Britain knew.
Verily, when your astronomers speak of sun matter and flames as clouds of vapor and gases unknown to science, we know it to be simply magnetic matter in its usual state of activity, and we feel inclined to smile at the expressions. We know that the invisible sun is composed of that which has neither name, nor can it be compared to anything known by your science on Earth, and that its reflection contains still less of anything like gases, mineral matter, or fire, although even we are compelled to use such expressions as vapor and magnetic matter. To close the subject, the coronal changes have no effect upon the Earth's climate, though spots do. The sun is neither a solid nor a liquid, nor even a gaseous globe, but rather a gigantic ball of electromagnetic forces, the storehouse of universal life and motion, from which the latter pulsate in all directions.
And that is something that science did learn later, is that the sunspots do affect us. And they didn't know that at the time. So how could KH know that?
Feeding the smallest atom as well as the greatest genius with the same material until the end of the Mahayuga.
Yes, he's going to point out that the sun is life itself. Nothing in our solar system would exist without the sun. He makes some really interesting comments and very poetic sometimes. Question number 10. Is the photometric value of light emitted by stars a safe guide to their magnitude? Considered, of course, in connection with distance as guessed by parallax. And is it true, as astronomy assumes, in the way of a theory, that the sun's surface emits as much light per square mile as can be emitted from any body?
I believe not. The stars are at least 500,000 times farther from us than the sun, and some are many times more.
And that's pretty accurate. The closest star, I forget exactly how far, but saying it's 500,000 times more than 93 million miles wasn't too far off.
The strong accumulation of meteoric matter and the atmospheric tremors are always in the way. If your astronomers could climb on the height of that meteoric dust with their telescopes and Havana cigars...
Well, you gotta have the cigars. You can't go anywhere without them.
They might trust more than they can now in their photometers. How can they? The real degree of intensity of that light can't be known on Earth. Hence, is not a trustworthy basis for calculating magnitudes and distances, nor have they hitherto made sure in a single instance, except in the matter of one star in Cassiopeia, which stars shine by reflected and which shine by their own light. They reflect light too? Wow.
Well, that's what he's saying. He's saying, like, for example, our own sun, what we see is not the actual sun. We're seeing a reflection. So science, of course, doesn't recognize that any suns shine by reflection. We're seeing the sun itself.
Wow. The working of the best double star photometers is deceptive. Of this, I have made sure so far back as in the spring of 1878,
which was only 4 years previous to that,
while watching the observations made through a Pickering photometer. Only one planet up to now has been discovered outside of our solar system, with all their photometers, while we know of a number of them, with only the help of our spiritual naked eye, every completely matured sun star having, like in our own system, several companion planets in fact.
Now this is interesting. Science knew of only one planet at the time outside of our solar system. Only one. And yet the Mahatmas knew of many.
And now we know that most stars have planets. Not
well,
all.
They have identified somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 planets. And whether or not every single sun has planets, that's probably debatable. So I don't think they would be in a position to estimate what percentage do and which ones don't.
Neither the Chaldeans nor even our old rishis had your telescopes or photometers, and yet their astronomical predictions were faultless.
Very interesting.
Why all of a sudden is he mentioning the Chaldeans so much?
Because they were extremely advanced.
And where were they? They were in the Middle East somewhere.
In the Middle East, I forget exactly where, but close to Israel, because Judaism copied a lot of that. Remember the epic of Gilgamesh? And the story of Noah and his ark was copied nearly word for word from that.
Okay.
So they got a lot of their philosophy and religious myths from the Chaldeans. They were far more advanced than modern archaeologists give them credit for.
You must not complain of my too long answers to your very short questions, since I answer you for your instruction as a student of occultism, my lay chela, and not at all with a view of answering the journal of science. I am no man of science with regard to or in connection with modern learning. My knowledge of your Western sciences is very limited, in fact, and you will please bear in mind that all my answers are based on and derived from our Eastern occult doctrines, regardless of their agreement or disagreement with those of physical science. Hence, I say, since your question is asked with a view to settling a disputed point in modern science, I will try to answer it in the clearest way I can. I say then, no, and will give you my reasons why. Now he's saying no to...
He is asking about the...
photometric value of light. Does that indicate their size?
Right.
Yeah, because a small star could shine brighter than a bigger star
Right.
for a certain reason.
And they have different temperatures, as we
Right.
know.
And as they age, they change. The red giant, the white dwarf, and such. We know that now.
Right.
No, and I'll give you my reasons why. They cannot know it for the simple reason that, heretofore, they have found no sure means of measuring the speed of light.
They were actually close, we'll find out. They had some ingenious methods, and they were really close. We'll find out how close.
The experiments made by Fizeau and Cornu, known as the two best investigators of light in the world of science, are not trustworthy either in respect to the velocity with which sunlight travels or as to its quantity.
They were actually very close as far as the speed. I don't know about the quantity.
The methods adopted by both these Frenchmen are yielding approximately correct results. Their toothed wheel can hardly fail to give splendid results on a journey of a few thousand meters round trip, there being no atmosphere, no meteoric masses to impede the ray's progress. The velocity of light will, of course, show some 185,000 and some odd miles per second.
And what is the final? I think it's 186,292 or something. So they were very close.
All they can say is that their calculations are approximately correct. If they could measure light above our atmosphere, they would soon find that they were wrong.
So that was their big problem, was that they had no way to get above the atmosphere to do the same type of measurement, or else they would have got it almost completely correct. Question 11. Is Jupiter a hot and still partially luminous body? And to what cause are the violent disturbances of Jupiter's atmosphere due, since solar energy has probably nothing to do with the matter?
It is so far, but is fast changing. Is Jupiter a hot and still partially luminous body?
Yes, and I checked that, and sure enough, it is luminous. Even without the sun, it is emitting perceptible light. And we'll discuss it a little more, but if you look at the entirety of the planet, it is hot.
Wow. So it's almost more star-like than planet-like.
Some scientists believe that it was a failed sun, that it could have become a sun, but failed and is a planet instead. Apparently, it was the first one that formed in our solar system, but only by a few million years. It's only a few million years older than the Earth is.
Your science has a theory, I believe, that if the Earth were suddenly placed in extremely cold regions, for instance, were it to exchange places with Jupiter, all our seas and rivers would suddenly be transformed into solid mountains. The air, or rather a portion of the gaseous substances which compose it, would be transformed from their state of invisible substances into liquids, which now exist on Jupiter, but of which men on Earth have no idea. Try to imagine the reverse condition, and it will be that of Jupiter at the present moment. The whole of our system is imperceptibly shifting its position in space, the relative distance between planets remaining always the same, and the distance between our sun and other suns being so vast as to produce but little, if any, perceptible change for centuries and millenniums to come. No astronomer will perceive it telescopically until Jupiter and some other planets, whose little luminous points currently hide from our sight millions upon millions of stars, Well, suddenly let us have a peep at a few of the Raja sons. They are now hiding. Whoa.
Yeah.
Like royal sons?
Yeah, apparently they were called king's sons or Raja sons in India.
Dang.
And yeah, of course, science is discovering new stars all the time. And apparently, some of these planets, especially the bigger ones, obscure our ability to see behind them. But as time goes on, there is a shift big enough that all of a sudden you can see stars that weren't visible before.
There is such a king star right behind Jupiter that no mortal physical eye has ever seen during this, our round. If it could be perceived, it would appear, even through the best telescope with a power of 10,000 times, as a small dimensionless point thrown into the shadow by the brightness of any planet.
So it's enormous and yet so far away that it would be a dot, even with a telescope with 10,000 multiplication factor.
It's interesting that he says behind Jupiter, because of course at some point during our year, that star would be behind Jupiter. But since Jupiter and Earth and all the planets revolve at different times, wouldn't the behind change? Like our angle?
It does, but apparently much slower than I realized.
It doesn't change annually? Like when we revolve around the sun, our angle towards Jupiter doesn't constantly change? I mean, it would have to, wouldn't it? If it takes 1 year for us to revolve, it takes Jupiter like 12 years to revolve. The angle is constantly changing.
Right. And I have never studied astronomy, so I don't know all of the ins and outs, but apparently this is possible. According to AI, it is possible that there are suns that we haven't seen before.
It might be the same relationship that we have to the moon, how even though the moon rotates and Earth rotates, we always only see that exact side of the moon, which still doesn't make sense to me.
There are some weird aspects to astronomy. There's no doubt about it.
Nevertheless, this world is thousands of times larger than Jupiter. And he's talking about the big sun.
Obviously.
The violent disturbance of its atmosphere and even its red spot that so intrigues science lately are due, 1, to that shifting, and 2, to the influence of that Raja star. What?
Yeah.
But it's so far away.
Wow.
So, gosh, sounds like they believe in astrology.
In its present position in space, imperceptibly small though it be, the metallic substances of which it is mainly composed are expanding and gradually transforming themselves into ethereal fluids and becoming part of its atmosphere. The state of our own Earth and its 6 sister globes before the first round. Draw your inferences and deductions from this, my dear lay Chela, but beware, lest in doing so, you sacrifice your humble instructor and the occult doctrine itself on the altar of your wrathful goddess, modern science.
So he's saying you may want to keep some of this information under your hat because you're going to get nothing but ridicule and disdain from the scientists, and they'll make fun of you and us. They don't care what science thinks of them. Let's talk a little bit about Jupiter, though. Jupiter is a very strange planet, and I don't know that much about it, but it's huge, it's gigantic, and there is no standing on the surface of Jupiter. There is no surface.
A gas giant.
Yes, like it's gases and liquids mixed together, and somewhere in there is a solid mass, but there's not a defined boundary because it's still very
liquid-ish. Also, it might not be like rock or something. It might be still.
There are several layers, and there is a core, and overall, it is still a hot planet, probably because of its gigantic size. And so, obviously, there is no physical life, as scientists call life. The Mahatmas would say, of course it's alive. The entire planet is alive. Every particle is alive. But he was saying at one point, imagine if you changed places with it and the reverse. So he was saying, if you took the Earth and suddenly made it way hotter than it is now, so he was comparing the state of Jupiter to that of the Earth, but then take the Earth and transfer that to something even hotter, and all of a sudden things that were solid and liquid would be vaporous, and the atmosphere would be filled with all of this vaporous mass, and there wouldn't be any living physical human beings, but there could still be humans in other realms, astral and above, and who knows but what that could be the case on Jupiter. It's interesting stuff that it would behoove us to think about and meditate on from time to time, because we get kind of solidified in our thinking, and we need to get out of that and expand our consciousness. But then people get a little nervous when they do that, and they're like, oh, want to come back to what feels more secure.
I wonder why Sinnott is asking about Jupiter specifically. I guess it was a hot topic at the time, but they knew about Saturn, didn't they? And Mars.
They were learning new information every single week. The magazines and newspapers were filled with scientific discoveries. So it was talked about in all of the elite circles everywhere around the world, but especially in England.
I wish he would have asked about Mars. What's going on with Mars?
We'll find out more later.
Oh, really? About Mars? That's
yeah,
cool.
And Mercury.
Nice.
Question number 12. Is there any truth to the new Siemens theory of solar combustion that the sun, in its passage through space, gathers in at the poles combustible gas, which is diffused through all space in a highly attenuated condition, and throws it off again at the equator after the intense heat of that region has again dispersed the elements, which combustion temporarily united? And let's talk about that theory at the time.
It's also interesting, though, before you do that, Terry, that Sinnott is asking these specifically scientific questions, which at face value have not much to do with theosophy or spiritual growth.
Mm-hmm.
And yet he decides to ask the masters about this stuff. It's cool. I like that he is. It's just such a departure from spiritual growth on the surface.
On the surface, yes. But he's realized that NKH has said they are occult scientists.
Mm-hmm.
He says, we study everything: archaeology, geology, astronomy, astrology, psychology, medicine. We have individuals who are experts on every aspect of existence, not just in the physical realm, but on all of the realms. Charles Williams Siemens' theory of solar combustion was a hypothesis about how the sun produced its energy. This theory suggested that the sun acted like a giant fan, drawing in hydrogen, hydrocarbons, and oxygen towards its polar surfaces. As the gases approached the photosphere, the sun's visible surface, they would undergo compression and a rise in temperature, ultimately bursting into flame. The resulting combustion would release heat and light, creating water vapor and carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. These products of combustion would then flow towards the solar equator and be projected into space. Obviously, it was wrong. So the Mahatmas knew more about many aspects of science than the scientists did, and they have caught up partly, but they still have many different things that they disagree on with the Mahatmas. So that was the question about whether there was any truth to that.
The answer: I am afraid not much, since our sun is but a reflection. Wow. The sun gives all and takes back nothing from its system.
Yeah, he's going to continue the analogy here.
The sun gathers nothing at the poles, which are always free even from the famous red flames at all times, not just during the eclipses. Nothing can reach the sun from outside the boundaries of its own system in the shape of such gross matter as attenuated gases. Every bit of matter in all its 7 states is necessary to the vitality of the various and numberless systems, worlds, in formation, suns awakening anew to life, etc., and they have none to spare, even for their best neighbors and next of kin.
Yeah, they guard it jealously.
They are mothers, not stepmothers, and would not take away one crumb from the nutrition of their children. Wow. The latest theory of radiant energy is the only approximately correct one.
Mm.
The latest theory of radiant energy is the only approximately correct one. I wonder who came up with that theory. For indeed, there is but one thing, radiant energy, which is inexhaustible and knows neither increase nor decrease, and will go on with its self-generating work to the end of the solar manvantara. The absorption of solar forces by the Earth is tremendous, yet it may be demonstrated that the latter receives hardly 25% of the chemical power of its rays, for there is a loss of 75% during their vertical passage through the atmosphere at the moment they reach the outer boundary of the aerial ocean.
And that is true. I don't know if science realized that at the time, but they do now. The majority of the sun's rays, once they hit the atmosphere, bounce off and we don't receive them at all. So that may be one more place where the Mahatmas were right and science hadn't yet caught up to them.
And we are told that even those rays lose about 20% in illuminating and caloric power. With such a waste, what must then be the recuperative power of our Father, Mother, Sun? Yes, call it radiant energy, if you will. We call it life, all-pervading, omnipresent life ever at work in its great laboratory, the sun.
So the sun is life as far as
Wow.
our planet is concerned.
Wow.
Nothing could happen without the sun. And he says it's inexhaustible. Science, I think, still disagrees.
Oh, yeah.
I think their theory is that it is basically, I don't know if they still say it's combustion. They do know that there is a certain amount of fusion, but he's going to talk more about that.
Well, he does say until the end of the solar manvantara, so at the end of the cycle of the sun, I mean, it does go away.
Right. So science obviously thinks that any of these processes could happen regardless of whether there are humans on Earth or not. The solar system could come to an end and any humans that are left would simply be destroyed. And they, of course, say that all of this is pre-planned. There's nothing that is by chance, that it all happens in a certain sequence. Question number 13, can any clue be given as to the causes of magnetic variations, the daily changes at given places, and the apparently capricious curvature of the isogonic lines which show equal declinations? For example, why is there a region in Eastern Asia where the needle shows no variation from the true north, though variations are recorded all around that space? Have your lordships anything to do with this peculiar condition of things?
Wow. Interesting.
Now, what are isogonic lines?
Ley lines or planet's nadis, maybe?
No. You have your pilot's license, right?
Yeah, I fly all the time.
Okay, then you obviously know isogonic lines because you can't fly a small plane without knowing them. Isogonic lines are the variations or declination from true north. The North Pole and the South Pole are determined by the axis of spin. That is true north and true south. You can't navigate unless you've got 1 or 2 points which remain exactly fixed at all times. if you have a compass, guess what? It doesn't always point to the axis, to the North Pole and the South Pole, and it wobbles. So this is the wobble. When I was a Boy Scout and we had to learn how to use a compass, we had to know what the deviation was. And I forget, it seems like it was 15 degrees to one direction or the other. I can't remember which way, but it seems like it was about 15 degrees off. And we'll show a little demonstration on the screen of how that works, how it shifts over time. And it's very interesting because there's a 20-second video that the NOAA, National
Oceanic
and Atmospheric Administration, has produced that shows from about 1640, I think, to 2020. So it's very interesting to see.
Wow.
Now, big planes have automatic instruments that calculate all of this. They don't have to do any calculations. But small plane pilots have to know these, and they have to calculate them manually. So that's what isogonic lines are. Let's see what he has to say.
No clues can ever be given by your men of science whose bumptiousness makes them declare that the idea of the sun being a giant magnet, which explains its production of light, heat, and magnetic variations observed on Earth, is only conceivable to those who see magnetism as a mysterious and unexplained force.
What the heck is bumptiousness?
Someone who's annoyingly confident or egoic or boisterous.
It means cocky, aggressive, and vociferous. Very sure of themselves and make sure that they let everyone know how smart they are.
They are determined to ignore and thus reject the theory suggested to them by Jenkins of the Royal Academy of Sciences of the existence of strong magnetic poles above the surface of the Earth. Nevertheless, that theory is the correct one, and one of these poles revolves around the North Pole in a periodical cycle of several hundred years, and that's the wobble we're talking about, right? Halley, the comet guy?
For some reason, Americans have decided that his name is Halley. It's not Halley's Comet, it's Halley's Comet. Or if you're in England, Halley's Comet.
Okay. Halley and Hanstein, or Hanstein.
He was Norwegian, I think. So.
Okay. Hanstein were the only scientific men besides Jenkins that ever suspected it. No, our lordships have nothing to do with the inertia of the needle. That would be cool, though.
Yeah. It's funny that Sennett used the term lordships because that sounds like something that Hume would have said.
It's very British.
Yeah, it is, because they do have lords in England, and they would be addressed as your lordship.
It is due to the presence of certain metals fused with other metals in that area. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Increase of temperature diminishes magnetic attraction, and a sufficiently high temperature often destroys it altogether. The temperature I am speaking of is more of an aura, an emanation, than anything science knows of. Of course, this explanation will never hold water with the present knowledge of science, but we can wait and see. Study magnetism with the help of occult doctrines, and then that which now appears incomprehensible and absurd in the light of physical science will all become clear. Wow.
Yeah. So the occult scientists pay attention to physical scientists, and they keep up with all, at least some of them keep up with all of it. KH, in our previous session, mentioned that on one particular topic, he hadn't done the research in a few years to bring himself up to date on what modern science knew about it. But they do. There is someone among the Mahatmas that keeps up to date on everything that is being discovered in the world. 14. Could any other planets besides those known to modern astronomy be discovered by physical instruments if properly directed?
They must be. Not all of the intramercurial planets, nor even those in the orbit of Neptune, have been discovered.
So,
At the time, in 1875, which planets were there? Do we know?
oh, I don't remember.
But maybe
I
5
think-
or something.
No, there were more than that. That's a good question. I'll look it up and
Well,
put it on
Jupiter
the
is the
screen.
5th planet. They might not have seen past Jupiter yet. Maybe.
Yeah, I wish I had thought to look that up, but
Mhm.
we'll put it on the screen.
Now, intramercurial. So we still don't know of any intramercurial.
Right,
So there's a planet, there's something closer to the sun than Mercury?
right. And astrologers call one of them Vulcan,
Oh.
but no one has ever seen it in the physical world.
Oh my God.
So we'll see if they ever discover anything inside the orbit of Mercury.
Well, he actually mentions Neptune. So obviously they know about Neptune, which is farther from Jupiter. Jupiter, Saturn, then Neptune, then
Right.
Uranus, I think. Okay. Wow. So there are more planets. Wow. So they are strongly suspected. We know that such exist and where they exist, and that there are innumerable burnt out planets, as they say. In obscuration, we say planets in formation and not yet luminous. Wait, so he's saying a bunch of stuff. So planets exist in our solar system that we can't see because they're in a period of rest, and there are new ones being formed, but he's saying not yet luminous. So he's saying planets are luminous. I mean, I know he said Jupiter is a little bit luminous, but planets aren't really luminous that we know about.
I don't know what he meant by that, but remember that they say that the moon used to be a planet, and even science has that as a working theory, and that it diminished greatly in size. And obviously, there are no physical human beings on it,
Mm-hmm.
but it is basically a dead planet.
Jupiter has a bunch of moons too. I wonder if, and those are not all dead because they have volcanoes and atmospheres and stuff. So. But then we know is of little use to science when not even the spiritualists admit our knowledge. Edison's,
Tessimeter.
adjusted to its utmost degree of sensitiveness and attached to a large telescope, may be of great use when perfected. When so attached, the tessimeter will afford the possibility not only to measure the heat of the remotest of visible stars, but to detect by their invisible radiations stars that are unseen and otherwise undetectable. Hence, planets also.
Hmm.
The discoverer, a fellow of the Theosophical Society and a good deal protected by Moria, thinks that if, in a space that appears blank, even through a telescope of the highest power, the tessimeter indicates an increase in temperature and does so invariably, this will be a regular proof that the instrument is in range with the stellar body, either non-luminous or so distant as to be beyond the reach of telescopic vision.
Aha.
Wow.
So, as we pointed out before, Thomas Edison was a member of the Theosophical Society.
Mm.
And before they left New York, they tried very hard to get a meeting with him. They invited him over to the apartment building where they were both living. He said, I'm so busy. I'm sorry, I can't accept.
But he was a member.
He was, but he was making tons of money, and he had numerous projects and was dealing with local officials, and he had an enterprise to build up. And this was interesting to him, but it wasn't of primary importance. Nevertheless, KH says that Moria was protecting him and obviously giving him hints. Whether or not he picked up on some of them, I don't know. But if he was perceptive, he certainly did.
I wonder if they did the same thing for Einstein.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
They very much pay attention to anyone who is prominent in whatever field, including politics. If they can give them good influence and they can pick up on it, it helps millions of people. But it all depends on their ability to perceive that.
Do you think they do the same for bad people too? Like during Hitler's rise to power?
Yes,
do you
of
think
course
were
they do.
Giving.
Yes, they always try to influence for the positive and on behalf of humanity. And there are examples of heroic acts in the midst of all the atrocities, like Schindler's List and things like that. They are able to influence some people to help mitigate the damage that is being done.
His tessimeter, he says, is affected by a wider range of etheric undulations than the eye can perceive. Science will hear sounds from certain planets before she sees them. This is a prophecy. Unfortunately, I am not a planet, not even a planetary. Otherwise, I would advise you to get a tessimeter from him and thus avoid me the trouble of writing to you. Then I could manage to find myself in range with you.
Remember many letters ago, they were trying to figure out a way that the two Englishmen could communicate directly with the Mahatmas. They were trying to get HPB out of the way as an intermediary and communicate directly. And KH gave him a list of things that were possibilities, but he indicated that each one of them couldn't work for one or another reason. And the biggest impediment was the Englishman. I think the letter was directed specifically to Sinnott. And he said, basically, you would have to raise yourself up considerably in spiritual perceptiveness and in purity before that could happen. So that is what all of us have to do if we want any chance whatsoever of any communications with these Mahatmas, is to purify our own auras, our own personalities. Get your ego under control. Decide what your priorities in life are. Meditate. Spend time contacting your higher self. That is the opening. That is the channel by which they could communicate with you. If you make the effort yourself, they have the ability, but they're not going to expend a huge amount of energy to make it happen. You have to get closer to their range before they can contact you without expending extra energy to do it. You have to earn that right. All right. We're finished with about half of the questions, and we are finished for now with the scientific questions. In the next series of questions, he's going to go back to Davidtron and some other topics of interest, learning more good stuff all the time. Every bit of it is helpful, even the scientific part. Remember, if you're ever going to become a Mahatma, you need to know about many, many different subjects. You can have one field that is your specialty, but you still have to know lots of other things because you have to incorporate that one specialty with everything. They are in a wonderful position, and of course they have to be. They are the protectors of our world. They are the intermediaries between the real rulers of our planet and the humans who have the most opportunity for advancement spiritually or for destructive energy that prevents spiritual advancement. We're the key factor here. It's our defects that are holding things up. All right. Shall we continue this next time?
Mm-hmm.
All right. It is very interesting. So thank you for following along. We hope you gained something of interest and something useful in every single session. We'll look forward to seeing you for session number 64.